Hello, you are listening to Spirit Talk Show. I'm Doyle. We are reading AI-generated stories, but we're also listening to people and talking about their lives and their history and the world that they've lived in and how it's changed. If you guys would like to get involved, you can go to spirittalkshow.com. You can see all the information there about the website and the show and where you can hear it. Of course, you can hear it on KBOO 96.5, the voice of Sacramento. And of course, you can also hear it on Spotify and Apple and all the podcasts. And, you know, I like to have guests in the studio, and I have a special guest in today. It's my father, Jim Doyle. Hey, Dad.
How are you?
So you grew up, you're going to be about to be how old in a month here?
Well, I was born Valentine's Day, 1942. I will turn 83 on February 14.
So I know you say you were born on Valentine's Day, but doesn't it say the 13th on your birth certificate?
Absolutely.
And why is that?
Well, I was born like at 12:45,
okay.
Which was on the nurse that was on duty put down that day's date, which was the 13th. It was actually the 14th.
Okay.
After midnight, of course, it became the 14th.
Well, don't you? But when I was a kid, didn't you celebrate it on the 13th though?
Well, my mum got a piece of paper to register the birth, and when she presented it some weeks later, it was the 13th. She noticed. She tried to get it changed, and it was. So my birth cert says the 13th, which I have used all my life.
Well, okay. Well, I remember celebrating your birthday on the 13th, but you're actually Valentine's. You were born on Valentine's Day.
I was.
So you have lived in Ireland for 83 years, and so. What would you say is the biggest change in Ireland since you were a kid?
Well, I suppose it's not fully correct to say that I lived in Ireland that time because I immigrated in 1961 to England.
Okay. Oh, yeah, Coventry, yeah.
Where I lived for 14 years for employment. Employment in Ireland at the time was depressed. There was just no work. Yeah. And thousands of Irish youth like myself immigrated at the same time.
So many people listening would probably be familiar with your hometown. So tell us a little bit where you're from and where you grew up.
Right. I was born in Killarney, which is in the southwest coast of Ireland. It's actually an area that's frequented by thousands of Americans, even at the present moment.
Yeah.
It's a holiday area, mountains, lakes. I grew up in the most amazing place.
Yeah, I know. I visited a lot, yeah.
Yeah. And my childhood was very, very happy and normal. Nobody had a lot, but I was born in the middle of the Second World War, and as the 50s or 40s and early 50s, there was still rationing of foods. Tea and butter were still rationed right into the early 50s.
Wow.
And there was just, my childhood was happy, and I suppose I had ambitions. I was fairly bright at school. I had the ambitions like most young people have. Yeah. But all that was to change in 1958. Mm-hmm. My dad, who worked in construction, worked for himself. Yeah. I used to help him, and this particular job, rush job, he was repairing a roof. So it was October 7th, 1958. How can I ever forget that day? Yeah. Because he fell about 28 feet from the roof.
Okay.
And he never worked again. So I was coming 17. So school, I had to take a job. I was the oldest of 7. Mm-hmm. I took a job working in a local hardware store. And, you would be in the store. When it was busy, you'd be out delivering bricks, whatever, So basically when I turned 19, I immigrated to England.
Yeah. So you're 7. I think that's who are the 7?
My older brother, which has passed away, he joined a religious order when he was 15.
Okay.
And he left home and he went to a novitiate in Dublin.
And that's Michael.
John.
John.
They educated him.
Okay.
So while he was one of the 7, I was when my dad had the accident, he wasn't told of the event because they were afraid that he would leave the order.
Oh, I see. So, okay, name your siblings. There's John.
My youngest is Ebina, which is an old Irish name.
Yeah.
Next one there was Margaret, who passed away a year ago.
Yeah.
Then there was Patrick, Michael, Mary, and myself.
So, Pat, Uncle Pat. You
Yes.
said Patrick.
Yeah,
Patrick is the ginger one that lives in Galway.
exactly.
Okay. And then who was after Pat?
Michael, he lives in Dublin.
Michael, and he still lives in Dublin.
He still lives in Dublin.
Well, hopefully at the time.
He's turned 80 in August last.
Well, you can say hello to them because I'm sure they can hear it in Ireland when this goes live.
Yeah.
So
Hi guys.
So he's sitting here my dad is visiting me in California. I live in the Sacramento area, actually east of Sacramento. And he's visiting me here after he visited my brother in Seattle. And I thought, what a cool thing. He can do my show. We can hear about some of the stories I haven't heard before. So you went to Coventry in the 60s.
That's right. I went to Coventry in 1961. I initially started working on construction for the first year until I sort of got my bearings of what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. I then got a job in the General Electrical Company, which I worked for about 18 months, didn't like it. And I finally got a position in Massey Ferguson Tractors, where as I say, I got promotion after a while. I had a very, very good job there, very well-paid job.
And you met somebody who we both know, of course, around that time.
I did. I met a young lady when I was 5 months in England. She had been 7 months there. She came from Mayo, which is on the west coast of Ireland. Yeah. And she was a student nurse. Okay. So I met her on the 30th of January, 1962.
Okay, wow.
Which is 62 years ago.
13th of January, okay.
30th.
Yeah.
30. Anyway, we went out for 3 years and we got married.
Okay.
We went back to Ireland for the wedding, honeymoon in Ireland, touring around Ireland.
Oh, wait, where'd you get married?
We got married in her home village of Robin in Hollymount, County Mayo.
Oh, wow. I didn't know you went back to Ireland to get married. See, I'm getting new information here. That's cool. Why haven't you told me this before?
You never asked.
So wasn't there a story about her? I don't know if you made this up or I heard it, about her going home and you followed her and you jumped out in the road in front of her and you insisted that didn't you guys break up or something and she went home or something?
Yes, we had, I think, this guy asked her to dance.
Yeah.
And how can I explain? I didn't like this guy.
Yeah.
And maybe I used it as an excuse to, should I say, have a quiet word with him.
So you punched him out, is what you're saying?
Something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so this beautiful young lady you met named Rose decided, feck you, and she went back to Ireland.
That's right.
Yeah.
This all happened with the assistance of about 7 pints of Guinness.
Well, of course, yeah. You probably were deep in the Guinness at that point.
Yes.
And so she went home. Was she planning to go home, or did she go home because of that?
I'm not sure.
But you followed her home.
Something like that as well.
Okay, and what happened when you followed her home?
Oh, you're not privy to that information, you know.
Oh, I'm not going to hear that information.
No, I'm afraid not.
I thought it was just you jumping out in the street in front of her and saying, "Come on, come back with me." But anyway, okay, you don't want to talk about it. So, okay, and why do you think you decided to go back to Ireland?
Well, I suppose in 1975 we returned to Ireland, but the story was I had a very good job and I had nice house. Mm-hmm. I had 4 boys, you included, and at that time, of course, the situation in England was in the mid-70s was very anti-Irish. Yeah. If you go back to 1969, where there was a civil rights march, and this for people, the Catholics in the north part of Ireland weren't getting equal rights, and they decided to take to the streets and demonstrate and so on. Yeah. This resulted in 1969, and there was a series of marches, and in 1971, the British Army, who were then in Northern Ireland, shot 13 civilians dead on the streets of Derry. Okay. Which became known as Bloody Sunday.
Yeah, and U2, is that the U2
The
song?
IRA then, who became very active, and they decided in the early 70s to take the shooting and bombing campaign to Britain, to the British mainland. Yeah. So it became very anti-Irish.
Okay, and IRA is Irish Republican Army.
Irish Republican Army, civilian army, if you like.
And that was the army that was formed by Michael Collins back in the...
Michael Collins and De Valera.
De Valera, they formed the Irish Republican Army back
Yes.
in the 20s, right?
There's been different phases of this.
Yeah, of course.
There was a treaty signed with England in August 1921, and this struggle had been going on for 900 years. Back in 98 and 1916 at the General Post Office and all.
Yeah.
And this all culminated in the armed struggle in 1919.
Okay.
And actually what happened then was, at the end of the Second World War, Britain were, I suppose, they had been involved in a war for 4 years. So they sent troops to Ireland, and a lot of them were of a criminal element, disorganised, undisciplined, and basically with their black uniforms and their brown boots, they became known as the Black and Tans.
I've heard of those.
And that's when the final War of Independence took place.
Okay.
And people can say why. I bet if you look even in the United States, Abraham Lincoln wanted to abolish. They say, why did the American Civil War started? Abraham Lincoln wanted to abolish slavery. I suppose that was probably one of the main reasons, maybe, Civil War in the South, which was,
Yeah, I understand. So, but I mean, it was a very hard time for Ireland, and of course, Michael Collins died in that. And but then the IRA continued until the 60s, and then they became a different organization.
In 1969, there was a split.
Yeah.
And the reason the split came about was, at that time, Sinn Féin, which was the political wing of the IRA, Sinn Féin is a Gaelic word, two Gaelic words which mean ourselves alone. They wanted to govern Ireland without any interference from Britain.
And those who are listening, Ireland right now, to this day, is broken up into two parts. The northern counties is Northern Ireland, owned by Britain, and the south, 28 counties?
26 in the
26 counties is Republic of Ireland, its own nation. So the part of Ireland is still occupied by Britain. Is that how they say it?
That's right. It's still under British rule, yes.
Under British rule, okay.
The Union Jack still flies in the north part of Ireland.
And they want, Sinn Féin, of course, wants freedom for all of Ireland.
Correct.
So I don't know if we're ready to talk about this, but our family has a little bit of connection with this and the story about our uncle. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Would you like to read the story we have here to see what information it has? There's a story on here about my uncle Frank Stagg is a hunger striker who died in hunger strike. I don't want to know. Died on hunger strike. I don't know all the information, so I don't want to talk about it like too much, right? But here is, we had AI look up a little bit about Frank, and so I'd like you to read it, and then maybe, if it's accurate or if it's right, let us know if it's but I'd like to talk about, I think you had a special involvement with Frank after he passed away, if you want to talk about that. So
absolutely,
okay.
yes.
So do you want to read this story and let me know if it's right? And
all right.
Okay, so
I will reading this. In the quiet town of Ballina, County Mayo, Frank Stagg's name was once spoken in whispers, a figure etched into the collective memory of Ireland's turbulent past. His life, marked by conviction, sacrifice and controversy, has since become a tale told in pubs and around hearts, a symbol of the price paid for freedom.
Did that seem pretty accurate?
It does, I suppose, yes.
Oh, wow.
Frank Stagg was born in 1941, actually October 1941, 5th of October, the 7th of 13 children. His family farmed the rugged land, their lives shaped by the rhythms of nature and the spectre of history. From a young age, Frank listened intently to tales of rebellion and resistance against British rule, stories that ignited a flame within him. He was a quiet boy, but his determination was evident in every action. By the time he reached adulthood, Frank had left Ireland, settling in England to work as a bus driver. But his heart remained tied to his homeland, and the growing tensions in Northern Ireland in the late 1960s pulled him into the orbit of the Irish Republican Army, the IRA. Frank joined the IRA in 1972, which is correct.
The year I was born.
Sorry?
The year I was born.
Yeah. Driven by a vision of united Ireland. He was not a man of violence by nature, but he believed that the British presence in Ireland could only be ended through struggle. It wasn't long before he was arrested during an operation in Coventry in 1973. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison for conspiracy to commit arson and other charges.
So this makes it look like, because I thought he was never charged with crimes. This sounds like he was arrested during an operation. It's suggesting that he was doing something for the IRA.
They were arrested on conspiracy charges.
But it's like, but this, I'm not saying, is this accurate? It sounds like it's saying he was arrested during an operation.
No.
So that's not true.
That is not true.
And the arson and...
They became known as the Coventry Seven.
Okay.
There was a Catholic priest involved with the Seven.
Oh, wow.
And he had documents in a briefcase, incriminating documents, which, at the time, of course, you had the Birmingham 6, the Guildford 4, people that were convicted and they were all innocent.
Yeah. So to be honest, you could be convicted for being Irish in England.
At the time it was very anti-Irish.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. In prison, Frank became deeply involved in the Republican cause, inspired by the hunger strikes of Thomas Ashe and Terence McSweeney. He saw the hunger strike as a weapon of last resort, a means to draw attention to the plight of Republican prisoners. In 1976, Frank embarked on a hunger strike demanding repatriation to Ireland. Along with other Republican prisoners, he refused to wear a prison uniform, insisting on his status as a political prisoner. His resolve was unshakable, but the British government under Harold Wilson refused to yield. For 62 days, Frank endured the slow deterioration of his body. Letters smuggled out of the prison revealed his unbroken spirit and his belief that his sacrifice would inspire others to continue the fight for Irish freedom. But on February the 12th, 1976, Frank Stagg died in Wakefield Prison, his hunger strike ending in martyrdom. Frank's death ignited a firestorm of emotion in Ireland. Thousands gathered to mourn their grief, mixed with anger at a government they saw as complicit in his death. But his burial became a source of bitter contention. The Irish government, fearing his grave would become a rallying point for Republican militants, diverted his body from the intended burial site near the Republican plot in Ballina. Instead, he was buried in a pauper's plot under concrete slabs to prevent any exhumation or ceremonies. It wasn't until 1977, after a covert operation by Republicans, that his remains were reburied according to his wishes near the grave of IRA leader Ernie O'Malley.
So we'll come back to that part a little bit later, but let's read the rest of the story. But I think that you have some information about that last sentence, but if you want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But let's finish reading the story and we'll go back to that, okay?
All right. Today, Frank Stagg's life is both a rallying cry and a cautionary tale. For some, he is a hero who gave his life for the cause of Irish unity. For others, his death raises questions about the cost of conflict and the human toil of ideological battles. His story lives on in songs, in the names whispered in the streets of Ballina, and in the debates that rage over Ireland's past and future. To his supporters, he was a man of unyielding conviction. To his critics, he was a reminder of the complexities of Ireland's struggle. But in the hills of Mayo, where the wind carries whispers of history, Frank Stagg remains a symbol of a dream yet to be fulfilled, a united Ireland, free and at peace.
So, what do you think about the information? I know there was some wrong information in that story, which you corrected as you went. What did you think of the information in that story?
Well, I suppose why Frank Stagg's body was kidnapped is it was when he died. His body was released from Wakefield Prison in Yorkshire in northern England in 1976 after about 10 days. Mm-hmm. In transit to Ireland, 2 years before Frank's death, his comrade Michael Gahan died on hunger strike.
Yeah.
His body was returned to Dublin for burial in Mayo on the west coast of Ireland. Yeah. And as the funeral cortege travelled across Ireland, every town shut up their businesses for the day, and in respect for the hunger striker. Mm-hmm. And the government of the day in 1976 for Frank decided this ain't going to happen again.
Okay.
So en route by air,
Yeah.
the coffin, accompanied by his brother George, when they reached Irish soil, they diverted the coffin. Instead of Dublin landing, they landed at Shannon on the west of Ireland.
Yeah.
George was arrested and placed in a cell, and his body at Shannon Mortuary was guarded by troops overnight.
Yeah. Wow.
Next day, they took his remains by helicopter to Ballina, where they buried him really in a pauper's grave, not a family grave, in a pauper's grave.
I know the story said family, but it's a pauper.
Yeah,
grave.
and it was dug, the grave was dug by Free State agents, police.
Yeah.
And they buried him with army protecting them.
Yeah.
The IRA appeared in the same graveyard next day with an empty coffin to carry out another burial, if you like, just to protest at what the state had done.
Yeah.
And there was big army involvement, and it was a very serious situation.
Wow.
And Joe Cahill, who was one of the IRA leaders of the day, swore that Frank's body would be reinterred in future in the Republican plot with former IRA like Ernie O'Malley and so on.
So they probably, when he said that, he didn't know how it was going to be covered.
He did not.
Which we're going to talk about here in a second, yeah?
That was in February 76, Frank was buried.
Okay.
Well, the government of the day decided they would guard his grave to prevent any removal from the grave. Yeah. So they had a caravan stationed at the graveside with armed police around the clock for 20 months.
Wow, almost 2 years.
Yes. After 20 months, the government changed, and the incoming Fianna Fáil government decided to remove, for cost or whatever, to remove the security from the grave.
Okay, yeah.
What they didn't know was that Frank's brother George had purchased the grave next to where Frank had been buried.
Someone had told him to do that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
for £5. Right?
For £5, believe that or not.
Yeah.
That was in September 1977.
Oh, yeah, wow.
On the 5th of November in 1977, a plan was hatched. Mm-hmm. 4 people, including myself, went into the graveyard at around 7 o'clock on the coldest, wettest night of the year. And we dug down.
By hand?
By hand.
And shovels?
By hand. We took it in turns. One guy watched the perimeter of the graveyard, and the other 3 took it turns, 20 minutes each at a time. We had to go down around 8 feet.
And it was raining, so was it raining on you?
It was constant raining.
Were you not afraid that it was going to cave in on you?
Well, one of the worries we had was before the government, on the change of government, before they left the graveyard site, they dug down with a mechanical digger and they covered most of the grave in concrete to prevent its removal. Yeah. What they didn't know was that the family, George, his brother, had purchased the adjoining grave.
Wow, yeah.
Anyway, we dug down about 8 feet and we struggled to get the coffin out. It took, put like this, we were about 4 feet down when we met a big rock. And at one stage we thought we were going to have to abandon the operation because, but it took about 2 hours and we got assistance from locals who were familiar with the grave, and they used some lifting equipment, what they call calipers. Yeah. These guys worked in the graves, they worked in the gravestones.
So they saw you there and they helped you.
Well, they knew what we were doing because they had, George had known them and he got one of the guys to the graveside, and we eventually, after 2 hours, got this rock up. And in fact, when we had to dig the grave at the Republican plot, his final resting place where he still rests today, that took a very short time. And, we left the graveyard around 2:30 a.m. in the morning. That was from like 6:45, 7 o'clock until around just after 2:30 a.m. And we travelled back to the East Coast, to County Meath.
Oh, you took him back to Meath?
Well, the 4 of us went back to Meath that night.
So where did the body go after you took
the
him
body was buried in the Republican plot, which was 70 yards from the plot that the government had buried him in.
Oh, so you just took him and buried him again?
That's right.
Did you open the coffin?
No.
Okay.
You see, Michael Gahan his comrade had been buried 2 years before. His coffin was put exactly on top of that, with 4 feet down.
Oh wow. Okay, and that's where he is to this day. But
that's where he is to this day.
Does the headstone say his name?
Well, there's 3 headstones on Frank Stagg's. There's one that was originally put on the grave that was buried by the police and the state, stating, if people go online and say Frank and Google Frank Stagg or Bing Frank, they will get this. It just said that he was buried here against his wishes by Free State agents.
Okay.
And then there's another headstone which states that he was removed here by Republican activists on the 5th of November 1977, and of course the Republican plot where he now stands, his name is as well.
So, but I mean, for a long time this was secret, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Because you could have gotten trouble for
We'd have got 10 years had we got, but after 30 years we were told it was okay to go public.
So you didn't put up the gravestone saying he's been removed until much later, right?
No, that's right.
So that was a recent thing. So we're almost getting to the end of the first half here, but I want to hear a little bit more about this story. But why were you picked, or was it because of your relationship with George?
Well, George was my brother-in-law.
Yeah.
Frank, when we got married first in 1965, Frank lived with us for about 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So I obviously knew him very well.
Yeah.
And when George asked me to be involved, I didn't hesitate.
Okay.
Because I knew how he had been mistreated.
Yeah.
In the English prison. And I'll give you an instance of that.
Well, before you do, I've got 20 seconds before I got to go to the break here. But think of that incident. You're going to start with the next half. But guys, could come back and listen to me talking to Jim Doyle, my dad, about his history with the Ireland and history and Republican stuff and IRA. If you'd like to get involved in the show, go to spirittalkshow.com, and we'll come back after this short break and we'll hear more about Frank Stagg from my dad.